There's a new report out that says Apple is finally gearing up to put OLED displays in their top-of-the-line MacBook models. Now, this would be a huge thing. We've already got OLED sitting over on the iPad Pro lineup. You might as well bring it over to the Mac. I know there's a lot of questions. Is it even gonna make a difference over things like mini LED? I gotta say, excitement seems really high among Apple enthusiasts here. There's a debate kind of going on about the timing, about the impact on battery life. It's not like the current display tech is bad. And for a lot of different work scenarios on the Pro, it's not gonna make a big difference. If you're just coding, you're probably not gonna care about super deep blacks or better contrast necessarily. You might, but maybe not as much as a photo editor or somebody doing graphic design or maybe 3D animation. But the inkier blacks and the color pop is really only part of the story. Of course it's gonna be awesome, right? And even if you're one of the smaller sliver of people who do like gaming or whatever on a MacBook Pro, you know, you're still gonna appreciate that. It's more immersive. If you're watching content, obviously, and you want it to be amazing, then you're gonna love that as well. But the other part of the story is the thinness. If you go with the OLED, then you can shrink down, you can slim down how thick that display is. And anything that you can shave off of this Pro device is gonna be awesome. That can continue a trend that we've seen in the iPad Pro lineup, where Apple's actually touting, here's our best product, and it's the thinnest iPad out there. And that means you get the power and the thinness. Right now, the brand new MacBook Pros that just came out have a liquid Retina XDR display. It gets bright, 1600 peak brightness there for the nits. It's HDR quality, right? It's good in low light situations, also helps with things like reflections and glare, just because it gets so bright so you can use it outside pretty comfortably. But anytime you start talking about OLEDs, what am I gonna say? You know what I'm gonna say, probably. The big drawback could potentially be burn-in. You guessed it. I mean, you probably know somebody, I know somebody, I'm thinking of them right now, who has an OLED TV that they actually burned in the news channel logo because they watched it so much. They just had it parked on this particular channel. And the burn-in issue is a real issue for, you know, certain styles of watching, let's say, and for certain display technology. Now, there's some things that you can do to minimize it as a tech company, and the more the OLED technology develops, the better it is. I think absolutely you would see these fly off the shelves just for this. When people saw that there was an OLED iPad Pro, that alone, I think, drove tons of sales because people were like, if this is the top level device, it needs to have the best display tech. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, okay? Let's actually go through some of the technical details. If you're gonna use OLED, you are gonna get quote unquote perfect black. So it's not like it just dims the dark pixels, it turns them off, right? So that's why you get such contrast, such a color pop, because the colors that are next to that perfect black are just gonna really stand out versus if it's just toned down and dim. So you are gonna get better, deeper blacks versus mini LED. On the other side of the equation, mini LEDs can actually get brighter, I believe. You can fact check me. So it's not like 100% like just better if you go OLED, but I think the overall net effect is that most people end up enjoying the OLED better. That's why you see people clamoring for it so much. Hey, if you're not already signed up for the newsletter, you gotta do it. It comes out on Fridays, it's free, it won't waste your time, fill you in on everything Apple related in 30 seconds or less, plus comes with free wallpaper. And if you didn't know, I've got some courses available online, new one on AI coming up shortly, but I've got a course to teach you how to be productive finally, a course that goes way beyond the basics of Apple's Freeform app, a course that'll teach you how to shoot pro iPhone video if you're a beginner, and plenty more. Check it out, it's all linked up down below. Something else you gotta think about is the viewing angles. On the iPad Pro, you can notice the viewing angles are much better on the new models with OLED. So not only is that cool for you if you're using it, but if you got a coworker over here, or you wanna show your spouse something, you're like, hey, check this out, and they're over here, they're actually gonna see it really nicely too, because those viewing angles are just better. The other thing is the response time, right? So it just has faster pixel response time. So if you have a lot of motion going on, you got fast-paced tasks, you're gaming, you're video editing, then in those instances and in many others, the OLED is gonna come in, not just handy, but I mean like it will make a noticeable difference. You got people out there who live and die by refresh rates, and I don't know if I fit into that category or not. I can use something like the iPad mini that doesn't have the latest greatest, you know, crazy promotion and live because of the type of work that I do on it. But if you're doing something like video editing, well, yeah, in that case, I really want the highest refresh rates. If I was gaming, I would want the highest refresh rates. It just depends on what you're doing. So, I mean, this isn't for everybody, right? Not everyone is going to notice these little details, and sometimes they are little details. But again, if you're buying the top end of a range, you do want it to be the best that you can get your hands on. You know, if you can slim that screen down, the width of it a little bit, the other thing that can do is shave off some weight. Now, I know we're kind of nickel and diming it here. I'm not sure you're really gonna notice that much, but if you can slim it down, if you can shrink the weight a little bit, these things do end up mattering in certain situations because number one, you don't want to mess with the battery life. So you don't want to lighten it by taking out some of the battery capacity, right? Apple has made that mistake before on the iPhone lineup. People are like, no, please thicken it back up. But if you can shrink the display down, that can make a noticeable difference, especially if you're traveling, especially if you're a student, especially if you're going to a lot of meetings, anything that heads or trends in a direction where it's going to be easier to bring with you is definitely a plus. So here's the thing, I guess the long and the short of it, I think for most users, the difference honestly would be kind of subtle just for everyday use. But if you're a professional in a certain field, then I think it really starts to matter. Then I think you really start to notice it. Then I think OLED will offer noticeable benefits. Now, your eyes aren't deceiving you here. I do have a Galaxy Z Fold 6 on the screen. Why do I have that? Well, some people are speculating that this could end up in the future being a move not just for better display technology, but more interesting possibilities for the overall shape of the MacBook Pro hardware. What does that mean? Well, with OLED, maybe there's a potential, probably not when it debuts, but in the future, for some foldable stuff to start happening. You've seen some of these displays that kind of like roll, they roll out, they roll back. OLED lets you do some really interesting things, and Apple has some pretty interesting and crazy looking patents. When they file a patent, doesn't mean that it's going to come out, but you got to keep your eye on this because it could end up being a sign of something that could be a lot more versatile and interesting and really shake things up beyond just the expected. In terms of the timing, what are people saying? I think you're not looking at anything before 2026 probably for this. That's going to be like the shorter term or window probably before OLED appears. But I've kind of given you some of my insight into this. I'd really like to know what you think. Is this going to be a game changer for people on the MacBook side of things, or is it going to end up being more of sort of a gimmick? And in your mind, is it a big deal, or is it more of an incremental upgrade, just sort of very expected? Give me your comments down below.